The coolant ring on relay spar 9 cracked at 0340 station time, and I filed the request myself because no one else wanted to admit we needed help from them. I am Iyeth Sorkal, 4th tier consensus node of the Vos Carol administrative weave, and I want to be honest about what I believed when I sent that message. I believed humans were a small, loud species who had recently been allowed a seat at the trade boards out of pity. I believed their engineers were eager and slow and harmless, the way a child is harmless. I asked for the least possible thing. 1 technician. 1 shuttle. 30 days, no urgency, just a patch on a ring that had been groaning for a decade. I did not expect an answer inside 4 hours. I did not expect the answer to be 3 escort tenders and 1 squat, slab-sided construction hull dropping out of transit 11,000 kilometers off our ring, it hull-lit grey-white under work floods instead of running lights, broadcasting nothing but a maintenance transponder and a name I had never heard. Anvilbride, Cradle-Wright Fleet, Terran Repair Division 3. I brought it up on the weave board for the whole station to see, because I thought it would be funny. Look, I said. They sent a fleet to fix a coolant ring. Half the administrative cluster laughed through the shared channel. That warm static ripple we do instead of sound. Someone suggested the humans had misread the request as a planetary siege. Someone else said perhaps this was simply how an adolescent species celebrates an excuse to leave their system. The Anvilbride did not slow as it approached. That should have told me something. A construction hull that size, and I want to be specific about the size, because numbers matter here in a way feelings do not. 410 meters of blunt, undecorated hull, no weapons ports that our scanners could resolve, 11 extending limb cranes folded flush against the spine like a sleeping insect. That hull does not normally approach a foreign station at landing velocity and just stop. It stopped. 40 meters off our outer ring. No deceleration burn we could measure. It was simply there, the way a wall is there. I sent the welcome protocol. Standard language, the kind we use for trade envoys. We acknowledge your arrival and welcome assistance with the noted repair. Please confirm crew complement for docking clearance. While I waited for a reply, I had our junior administrators run the usual courtesy scan on the incoming hulls, the one we run on any visiting vessel so the welcome committee knows what to say. It came back mostly empty, which I found reassuring at the time.
No weapon signatures resolved.
No shielding beyond standard hull plating. No drive output that registered as remarkable. I remember telling the junior cluster that this confirmed what I already believed, that we had been sent the gentlest, most unthreatening fleet a polite species could assemble, the equivalent of sending a single nurse to look at a paper cut. I made a note in the log calling it a reassuring gesture. I want that note on the record, because I wrote it in good faith, and I was wrong about almost every word of it. The reply came back in 11 seconds, and it was not from a person. It was a status ping, repair manifest attached. Proceeding. I did not know what a manifest was going to contain. I assumed it would list a coolant ring. It listed 41 items. I read the list twice because the first time I assumed the formatting had broken. Coolant ring fracture, primary. Yes, that was mine. That was the one thing I had reported. But beneath it, secondary stress fatigue in 8 support struts we had not flagged. A slow pressure bleed in cargo bay for that our own sensors had logged as nominal for 6 years because the drift was so gradual no single reading ever crossed a threshold. A reactor baffle running 4 degrees hotter than spec, which our engineers had dismissed as instrumentation drift. 3 hull plates with subsurface microfracturing from a meteor strike 11 months ago that we had patched cosmetically and never rescanned. And item 19, deliberate sabotage cuts in the secondary power trunk, consistent with hand tooling, approximately 4 months old. I sat with that one a long time. We had a saboteur on this station for 4 months, embedded somewhere in our own consensus, cutting trunk lines slow enough that nothing alarmed, and we had not found it. A construction ship that had been in our system for under 5 minutes had found it from outside the hull. I called the engineering cluster to ask how a list this long had been assembled before the fleet had even finished its approach burn, before a single crane had touched our hull, before anyone aboard the Anvilbride could possibly have run a physical inspection. The answer, when it came, was almost insultingly simple. They told me they had read our own structural telemetry. The public maintenance broadcast every station transmits as a courtesy. The one we had always assumed was too dense and too dull for any outsider to bother parsing. We had been publishing the problem for months. No one outside our we've had ever looked at it closely enough to see it. The humans looked once, on approach, in the time it took their hull to cross the last 100,000 kilometers, and saw all 41 things at once, the way you'd see every crack in a windshield the instant the light hits it right. The cranes deployed at the 6-minute mark. I watched them on the long-range feed because I could not look away. They did not move like our maintenance drones, which crawl and search and pause to recalibrate. They moved like they already knew exactly where everything was, which I suppose, now, they did, the manifest had told them. 3 cranes went to the coolant ring and replaced the entire assembly rather than patching it, working in a silence that had no flourish to it at all, no display, the way you'd expect a thing to move if it had stopped needing to prove that it could. A 4th crane went to Cargo Bay 4 and welded a bulkhead seam from the outside in under 90 seconds. I noticed something else in that window that I did not flag for the consensus until much later, because at the time it seemed like a small thing. The 3 cranes working the coolant ring did not communicate with each other on any channel our interceptor ray could detect, and yet they never collided, never paused to let another finish, never duplicated a motion. Our own maintenance drones require a coordinating signal broadcast continuously or they tangle within minutes. These did not appear to need one. When I asked the dry-voiced human about it later, he said only that the cranes had run that exact ring replacement procedure enough times that they no longer needed to discuss it, the way 2 people who have worked together for years stop narrating what they're doing. I did not find that comforting. A weapon that does not need to talk to itself is not less dangerous for being polite about it. A 5th went to the reactor baffle, and that was the one that frightened the engineering cluster enough that they opened a panic line to my desk. They said the human crane had reached a sealed access port that required a 17-digit consensus authority code we had never transmitted to anyone, had never transmitted at all, existed only inside our own internal weave, and it opened the port anyway, gently, the access panel coming away clean with no forced seam, no scoring, no sign it had been anything but invited. I asked the fleet, on open channel, how they had that code. The answer came back from a different voice this time, a person, finally, dry and unbothered, the kind of voice that has said the same sentence many times before to many different worried customers. We didn't need the code, Warden. We mapped the lock mechanically from the outside and walked it open. Your code's still secret. We just don't really use locks the way you mean them. I had assumed, until that moment, that a sealed access port was a wall. I understood, in the space of that one sentence, that to them it had only ever been a shape. It took the Cradle-Wright fleet 51 minutes to complete every item on the manifest, including the 19 they had found themselves and the one I had asked for. 51 minutes for 41 repairs on a station that our own crews had quietly agreed, in private channels I thought were private, would need 8 months and a third of our remaining operating budget. The saboteur was the last item resolved, and it was the only one that involved no crane at all. A single data packet arrived on my private channel, not the station's, mine, a destination I had never given them, containing the access logs, the trunkline tooling signature, and a face. One of our own 3rd-tier nodes, someone I had shared consensus cycles with for 6 years, someone whose grievance with the administrative weave I had genuinely never suspected ran deep enough for this. I asked, again on open channel, how they had identified an individual inside a fused consensus species from outside the hull, using sensors I did not believe existed. The dry voice answered again, and this time there was a pause in it first, the smallest one, like he was deciding how much to say. We didn't identify a person, Warden. We matched a tooling signature to a hand. The person part, that's yours to deal with. We just don't like leaving sabotage unflagged when we are already inside doing the rest. I asked one more question, because by then I had stopped being able to help myself. I asked what would have happened if the saboteur had still been at the trunk line when the crane reached it, tools in hand, caught in the act. There was a longer pause before the answer came, long enough that I assumed the channel had dropped. Then, nothing would have happened to him, Warden. We'd have logged it, same as we did, and moved to the next item on the list. We are not the division that handles people. We are the one that fixes the thing the people broke. That sentence sat heavier with me than any threat could have, because a threat at least tells you where the line is. This told me there wasn't one to find, that whatever they were capable of, harming someone simply was not a function this particular fleet possessed, the way a wrench does not possess the function of persuasion. It made me wonder, not for the last time, what division does handle people, and whether anyone on this station would ever want to find out. The fleet did not wait for thanks. The cranes folded. The anvil bride's work floods dimmed. There was no farewell broadcast, no request for payment, no demand of any kind, only a closing status line on the manifest channel. All items resolved. No follow-up required. Safe travels. And then they were gone, the same way they had arrived. Not a deceleration this time, but an acceleration with no visible burn signature at all, the hole simply not where it had been a half-second later, gone in a way our tracking suite logged as an error rather than a departure, because the math it would have required did not match anything in our archive of how ships move. I sat with the silence after for a long time before I told the rest of the consensus what I had learned. I had asked for one technician to patch a coolant ring. I had been laughing, an hour before, at the idea that a species barely out of its own gravity well had sent a fleet for a job that small. I understand now that the fleet was never the joke and never the threat, either. It was simply what they keep on hand for repairs, the unarmed division, the one that does not fight, and it found in 51 minutes everything that 8 months of our own best engineers had missed, including a danger inside our own weave that none of us had wanted to see. I do not know what they send when something actually goes wrong. I have decided I would prefer never to find out. I have also decided, and I record this for whoever inherits this post after me, because someone should know it before they laugh at the next small request that comes back too fast, that the most unsettling thing in this entire log was never the speed, or the silence, or the lock they didn't bother to pick. It was that dry, unbothered voice, the one that sounded like a tradesman finishing an ordinary shift, saying we just don't really use locks the way you mean them, and meaning it as nothing more than a fact. We filed for a coolant ring. They sent a fleet that could have walked through anything on this station, and chose, instead, only to fix it. I have struck the word harmless from every report I write about them from now on.